Yo, what's up? This is Jay Dennis, and we're back with another Right and Reviewed video. The reviewed is the secondary part. That's why I say it like that in some of the videos. Today we're going to be looking at a metalcore legendary band that was huge to me during my high school years, and to this day that I still very much enjoy. All That Remains. We're going to be doing their 9 albums from Behind Silence and Solitude of 2002 up until their most recent and probably their last for a while release, Victims of a New Disease in 2018. Obviously, when one of your biggest contributors to the band prematurely passes away, which was a really sad death. I don't know if All That Remains is going to be in the process of putting anything out anytime soon. I haven't checked on Wikipedia if they're doing anything, or if Phil Labonte or whatever, anybody else is doing anything. But at the very least, even if it's a while, they got a wonderful legacy behind them, even if there's a little bit of polarization on the most recent decade's work. But ultimately, I've been listening to All That Remains since I was 15 during the golden age of metalcore, mid-2000s. Started when I was a sophomore in high school. I was listening to them when Fall of Idealism was their most recent release, and then Overcome was just a massive senior year album for me. So, and then after that, kind of fell off for a while, but then when I heard Victims of a New Disease in 2018, I was like, ooh, I was hooked. And then, of course, as I'm doing these ranked and reviewed videos, I find that I enjoy getting back into bands like this if I've been missing some of their albums, because I've become more open-minded about music, and I'm going to address some of the misconceptions I had about some of their albums that I listened to or barely listened to or just kind of shook off for stupid reasons. But at the end of all this, All That Remains, I don't know if they'd be in my top 20, maybe top 25. I really do enjoy this band a lot. A few of their albums are iconic, but what I will say is, even if they're not my most favorite band, Phil Labonte is definitely one of my favorite vocalists. Everything he does is awesome. His screams are intense, his highs, his lows, they're brutal. His clean singing is excellent. I just think he's got an excellent voice. I got no complaints about Phil Labonte's vocals. I like when he's at his best, like it's like top tier, like it can't be matched. And it's inspired me in my own vocals in some ways when I'm not doing new metal stuff. And then, of course, Ole Herbert, excellent lead guitar player, plays really great, shreddy, legato-y solos. So, all in all, I've always enjoyed their music, and we're going to go through their 9 albums and rank and review them. All That Remains, again, definitely a great band to say the least. So I'm excited to do this one. So, just trying to think, is there anything else I want to mention? Nope. Just glad I got back into them. So, at the number 9 spot, oh yeah, I guess before I do get started, as per usual, I did compare my rankings to other ones that I've seen online, and there's going to be some variance, but there's also going to be some solidarity between some of my picks. Like, even though I typically go against the grain on a lot of things, there are quite a few albums that where everybody says they're the best of all time. I typically agree with them, depending on the band. Don't know if that'll be the case with All That Remains. We'll have to find out, but there is going to be some variance, and I do enjoy watching other people's rankings or reading other people's blogs where they rank albums. So that's the fun of this, is finding out people's different opinions and why they rank things a certain way. So, at the number 9 spot, we have their debut album, Behind Silence and Solitude. It's just your typical early 2000s raw metalcore album where the vocalist hasn't quite hit his stride yet. They have a limited budget, so it only sounds so good. The band hasn't been together super long, so the chemistry isn't as powerful as it becomes in later albums. So as a debut, it's pretty solid, but there really aren't any songs that really stand out to me and get me excited, except for, and I felt this way since high school, the song Home to Me. It's got an amazing bridge and amazing guitar solo. That's the only song that I gave above an 8 out of 10. Everything else was between like a 7.5 and a 7.8. Just kind of a good album, but nothing really stand out, really nothing to write home about, except for the song Home to Me. That's a great song. Everything else is just kind of generic metalcore, but if you look at the year 2002, it's impressive that they were writing that music that early on. Like if they had put this album out like in a later year, then it probably wouldn't do as well. And I do take that into consideration. I look at what year it came out and how potent it was to whatever movement or what trend was going on at the time. So that's number 9, debut album, Behind Silence and Solitude. Number 8, we have their 2015 release, Order of Things. Let me see here. Was there... Okay, so these next two, the 8 and 7 spot, were almost tied, but I'm going to give the number 8 spot to Order of Things, which features the bass player. I don't know her name. She has like the most vocals on this album, like background vocals. What I'll say is it's just kind of an inconsistent album, but there are some catchy ass songs on here. It sounds good, mixing wise. It opens on a good enough note, which probably won't end well, and No Knock. Like, those are good songs. But Divide and Greatest Generations are kind of not their greatest songs. But then it picks up for the next couple tracks. For You is a great ballad. Like, they do ballads well. I don't care if All That Remains is doing ballads, alternative metal, or straight up in your face death metal core. I think they do all the sounds great. So any dislike I have for All That Remains has nothing to do with them trying out different styles. It just depends on how it's executed. So when they do melodic tracks like For You really well, that elevates the album. But Reason to Fight is probably the best song on the album. And then Victory Lap, I think that's a really catchy track. I really enjoy his clean vocals over heavy riffage. And then it closes on a pretty solid ballad as well. Critical and self-realization, or some criticism and self-realization, whatever it's called. I shorthanded it. So I enjoyed the alternative metal sound of this album. They got a little heavy occasionally, not as much as on other albums, but they're great vocals with pretty heavy music. The great vocals being the clean vocals. But this definitely isn't one of their heavier albums, but I think for the most part it was executed on a great level. It got like an 8 out of 10 with a couple of catchy tracks on there. But the album as a whole, it does have a couple of dips, and that's why it's at the number 8 spot. And frankly, I never listened to this album until I got to doing this ranking. So I did listen to it a few times. It did get better on the second and third listen through, but this is one of those albums where I probably won't listen to it from start to finish. I'll just take a couple of tracks and put it on an All That Remains playlist. At the number 7 spot, we have their 2010 release for We Are Many. Almost tied with Order of Things, just slightly better. It opens on a much better note. Now Let Them Tremble and For We Are Many. Great instrumental, mostly instrumental, leading into For We Are Many, which has just a very catchy chorus with great guitar work on the riff side. Some of the People All the Time is a very heavy song. I kind of described this album as like an Overcome light, where they kind of kept the same themes as Overcome, the previous album, and just kind of expanded upon it here. Faithless, Hold On. This album just got slightly higher than Order of Things, not because there's more fun, catchy tracks or anything, but just because there's less dips. It's a more solid album, and Won't Go Quietly is by no means one of my favorite tracks, but Phil LeBont does this weird thing, or whoever records and mixes him does this weird thing where it's like a sing and a scream layered, and to me, I don't really like that, especially if it's not executed well, but in that particular song, Won't Go Quietly, the chorus, I think it sounds pretty good. So it's just the little things that make this album slightly better than Order of Things, but I remember even in 2010 when it came out, I got it, and it was just underwhelming at the time. It wasn't as great as their last couple of albums, which after putting out that many solid albums in a row, you're bound to come up to a dip there. So at the number 7 spot, we have their 2010 release for We Are Many. Next up at number 6, we have their 2017 release, Madness, which this is where I see a lot of people put this album like towards the bottom, but I think they just executed. First of all, the album sounds good. The mixing and the mastering and just everything just sounds really good, which helps if there's like a lack of catchiness or a lack of solid songwriting. It can help elevate the album. It's not like way better than the last three albums, but it's just better. Even though Safe House isn't the most solid opening, it does have some solid riffs in there. Madness is catchy. Even though Nothing I Can Do isn't exactly their best song, they went for something different there, and they did some weird, scale. I think it was executed pretty well. But where the album really gets better is If I'm Honest and Halo. Those two tracks in a row are great songs. I love the song If I'm Honest. I think it's catchy. I like the guitar riffage. I like it. Sounds like a 90s alternative song almost. And then Halo is just a really catchy, beautiful song, and I like the piano work in it. The best track on the album, in my opinion, is Open Grave. That's just one of their better tracks overall. And then the rest of the back half of the album is actually pretty consistent from Open Grave all the way up to their cover of Thunder Rolls. I think it's a pretty solid album for the most part. Again, not a whole lot of tracks except for Open Grave to like get super excited about, but I just think the alternative, the catchier melodic stuff was executed well. And this is, I might have misspoke earlier. Order of Things might be slightly heavier than Madness. I don't know, but it's in the same camp as Order of Things with regards to it being one of their less heavy albums. But I think it's better executed and more consistent, which is why it's this much higher up. The whole album's in drop B. Generally, I don't prefer them in that tuning, but I think they sound good in this one. And the couple of tracks that are better elevated it higher up to the number 6 spot. All right, and at the number 5 spot, this one surprised me, but here it is. It was kind of tied with Madness, but I'm going to give the slight edge to this one. At the number 5 spot, we have 2012's A War You Cannot Win. First things first, just from start to finish, it's just a very solid and consistent album. There's really no songs that I hate, except for Sing for Liberty and the closing track, A War You Cannot Win. Not particularly my favorite tracks, but it's kind of forgivable with that many tracks. It's okay. And it has a couple tracks that are slightly better than Madness, like I really enjoyed what they did with the more alternative metal tracks. I got this album wrong. When I was younger, when this album came out, when I was 21, I saw this album in the album cover, and I heard that they got on the radio with What If I Was Nothing, and I was just like, oh, look at this album cover. It's got AK-47s and a skull on it, and it says A War You Cannot Win. All that remains is sold out, and I never actually listened to the album. I used to be pretty ignorant about how I looked at music sometimes. But this album's actually pretty heavy off the start. Dawn Through the Ages is a pretty heavy track. But yeah, overall, this one almost tied with Madness, just a slight edge to this one just because of the consistency and because the more alternative metal songs like Asking Too Much and Not Fading, I really enjoy those tracks. I really enjoy when they kind of go in that more alternative metal direction, not playing just in-your-face metalcore all the time. I mean, it's great, they do it well, but if you do it all the time, it does get a little repetitive unless you're a certain band like Black Dahlia Murder. Like, they can constantly write that heavy shit and be good at it. I like that All That Remains branched out and did some softer material. Like, they do it well. War You Cannot Win, another album that I didn't really listen to until I did this ranked video. I listened to it a few times. From start to finish, it is a pretty solid album. Gets an 8.17 out of 10, just based on my scores. And most of the albums are above an 8. It's just a couple of songs that drag it down a little bit. But really no nostalgia value, but there are some solid alternative metal tracks on here. And I was wrong. Just because a band has a standout single that's soft and their album cover looks like generic butt rock doesn't mean it's not going to be a solid album. So definitely worth listening to. Next up at the number 4 spot, we have their most recent album, and hopefully not their last album, 2018's Victims of a New Disease. I think this is their shortest album, but it nails it. They came back. I thought Madness was supposed to be their comeback into the heavier side of things, but no, Victims of a New Disease was. This is the best album they put out since the 2010s, definitely, or the 2000s. Fuck Love is definitely one of their best opening tracks. I gave that one a 9 out of 10. Everything's Wrong is one of their best. It's like a much better version of Madness, the self-titled track. But one of my favorite All the Remains tracks is actually on this album. It's called Blood I Spill. It's just so fucking heavy. When Phil Labonte does the low, he does that. He does it so fucking good. And you mix that up with some tritones and some pinch harmonics, that low-end riff. It's just way too good. Wasteland is a solidly catchy song. This whole album, I believe, is in drop B also, but it's just better written than Madness was. By the way, they didn't play in drop B since Behind Silence and Solitude. Everything else between them had been in D standard and C sharp standard, I believe. Alone in the Darkness is a beautiful ballad, and it's mixed well. His voice sounds really good in it. It's definitely one of my favorite tracks. And then the back half of the album is pretty solid. That's where the weaker tracks are, like Broken and Victims of a New Disease. The only reason why this album took any type of hit, which, by the way, I gave it an 8.7 out of 10. It was such a great comeback album. The only reason why I gave it probably not a 9 is because as great as Phil sounds, there's a couple of tracks like Victims of a New Disease and I believe Broken where I don't know what it is. His clean voice, it sounds really nasally. I don't know if it was a mixing thing or what, but he sounds like he's trying to channel his inner Howard Jones without actually completely transforming into Howard Jones. Maybe it's just something I've noticed, but if you listen to literally the closing track, Victims of a New Disease, it just sounds really muffled and really weird. I don't know what it is, and that kind of took away from the quality. But other than that, the music is phenomenal. Just Tell Me Something is another great ballad with Danny Worsnip from Asking Alexandria. So Victims of a New Disease is much like their past couple of albums prior to that, except everything is executed better and they brought the heavier back even better. So that's why it's at the number 4 spot. Next up, of course, we have the top 3. We have the golden age of metalcore. We got the albums that were paramount to part of my high school years, because my high school years were very much influenced by the golden age of metalcore of the mid-2000s. At the number 3 spot, we have This Darkened Heart, which is an amazing sophomore success. By the way, This Darkened Heart and the number 2 album are pretty neck and neck, but the only reason why I gave This Darkened Heart number 3 is just because just a little bit less nostalgia value and a few less catchy tracks, but it's a very well-written album. The acoustic work is phenomenal in this album. The instrumental Regret Not to this day gives me chills. I Die in Degrees is still one of my favorite songs from All That Remains. The Deepest Gray is a song that finally hits me hard. I love that song, but it just opens on an amazing note with Death in My Arms. Vicious Betrayal, there's just riffs in this album that you don't hear like in any other album. It's a very unique album, but Phil's voice is still just a little underdeveloped. So as great as this album is, it's still only showcasing what is to come, but what is to really be respected in this album is the guitar work, the solos, the instrumental sections, and even though he's not necessarily at the top of his game, he's much better than he was in Behind Silence and Solitude. So, at the number 2 spot, we have 2008's Overcome. This is definitely the most sentimental album to me. It was like one of the soundtracks to my senior year, being with other albums like Slipknot's All Hope Is Gone, Trivium's Shogun, Bleeding Through. I forget the album. It's got Orange County Black and Blue, whatever that album's called. Declaration. Anyway, Overcome is just fucking amazing. It just kind of cranked up a little bit of the intensity that you got off of Fall of Ideals, and they added a little bit of more catchiness to it. It opens up with, in my opinion, All That Remains' absolute best opening song, Before the Damned. That song just eviscerates you. It hits hard from the beginning. It's got an amazing solo. It's got a little bit of like a Alice in Chains Them Bones sound to it almost, but the guitar work is phenomenal. The vocals are excellent, and it's catchy, and it just gut punches you so hard. I think 2 Weeks is an okay single. This is where my complaints about All That Remains start to come in, where they did it with 2 Weeks and Undone, where they did that weird thing where they like layered a scream with his clean vocals, but like it sounds like his clean vocals are really gritty, but they're not. So I don't know if it was a mixing thing or whatever, but it kind of takes away the quality of 2 Weeks and Undone. But they're still great tracks with great musicality behind them. Forever in Your Hands is a really catchy, awesome song. When it's just him singing, nothing else layered on it really, it sounds phenomenal. Chiron is an epic All That Remains track with a great build-up, great soloing, great music video. This album is just really well executed in terms of like the catchiness and the brutality. And of course it closes off with Believe in Nothing, which is an amazing Nevermore cover. So yeah, when it comes to Overcome, that album was definitely spinning quite a bit my senior year of high school, and there's definitely a lot of nostalgia value there. I just thought it was a hair better than This Darkened Heart, because there were a couple of tracks on here that definitely broke the 9 out of 10 mark. Oh shit, did I lose my space? MySpace.com. Where is it? Okay. Yeah, so the best tracks on Overcome are Before the Damned, Chiron, Believe in Nothing. But like you also do have really heavy tracks in there like Relinquish. I listened to that song quite a bit also, but it's got the nostalgia factor. It's got the amazing follow-up to obviously what you know is their best album now, Fall of Ideals. They did a great job following up that amazing third album of theirs. Overcome is awesome. And if you're definitely more into the heavier music, but you also enjoy the catchy side, I would introduce somebody to Overcome first. But if somebody really wanted to get into just some vintage, classic, like crown jewel metalcore, I would point them to their number one album, The Fall of Ideals. This album has, first of all, this is the one that got me into All That Remains, of course. Like I said, I got into them my sophomore year of high school. I got into like bands like Chimera, Trivium, Shadows Fall, All That Remains, all these bands. They were part of the golden age of metalcore. And like everything about this album is just everything about the band at their best. Phil's voice sounds flawless on this album. Whether it's mixing and mastering or execution of his lyrics or what have you, I have no complaints about how his vocals were recorded on this album. He just sounds amazing. And even if some of the riffs sound like, like, generic metalcore, I think this album has Shannon Lucas from Black Dahlia Murder and other bands on here. So this album has the best drumming, and it definitely has some of the best music writing, some of the best sequencing, solos, and even though it's not my favorite song, I do give it an 9 out of 10 because I can admit that This Calling is an amazing song. It's not my favorite one, but it is a great opening track with an insane scream. Phil's vocals are just top tier on this album. My favorite tracks are It Dwells in Me. My all-time favorite All That Remains song is on this album. It's The Weak Willed. I gave that one a 9.6 out of 10. You just cannot fuck with the death metal low-ass vocals with like the dissonant guitar work in the background. The clean part at the end. I just love that song. Weak Willed has like inspired me to do certain types of vocals in certain songs that were never released, that were part of a different genre. So this album has a lot of influence on me. 6 is an iconic track. Before Becoming the Catalyst was one of my favorite tracks back then. Still really love it. The song that introduced me to All That Remains was actually The Air That I Breathe. I was like, okay, how can a band be this good, this heavy, this catchy, and there's a guitar solo? Oh my God. So my first impression of this band was blown away by Fall of Ideals as an album in the air that I breathe as a single. And a song that gives me chills to this day, and I love even more now, is Empty Inside. So not just like with Overcome, but Fall of Ideals has its own level of sentimental value from like my sophomore year of high school and just like hanging out with my friends that we listened to these albums together. But just with every cylinder firing, this was All That Remains' best album. It had the best drumming. It had the best vocals. It had towards the top the best guitar work and soloing work. And just in terms of where it's at in their discography, it's just perfect. And its place in metalcore history just makes it a classic. So I want to thank you guys for watching or listening to this video. Quick review from 9 to 1, from worst to best, even though I enjoy all their albums. Behind Silence and Solitude, Order of Things, For We Are Many, Madness, A War You Cannot Win, Victims of a New Disease, This Darkened Heart, Overcome, and Fall of Ideals. So thank you guys for checking out my channel. Make sure you check out my other videos. Forgot to say this early on, but I did not expect my 7 Dust ranked and reviewed to blow up so quickly, so thank you guys for doing that. Let me know in the comments what you agree with, what you disagree with, what your favorite albums or songs are. If you have any stories about All That Remains or any sentimental value, I'd love to hear them. And be sure to check out my next couple of videos that are coming out. I got quite a few bands in the chamber coming out.